So we're in Masechet Shabbat, Perek Rishon, Mishnah Aleph, first chapter, first Mishnah. כבר הזכרנו בפתיחה, we already mentioned in the beginning, this is the introduction, שמסכתנו פותחת באיסור הוצאה בשבת מרשות לרשות. Our Mishnah is going to start discussing taking an object from one domain to another domain. And like we said before, there are 4 domains. So we're going to be discussing taking an object from one domain, carrying it, and putting it into another domain. אף שמלאכה זו נמנית אחרונה ברשימת 39 אבות המלאכות. Even though that's the last one when it comes to the melachot, the 39 prohibited jobs, we're in the introduction for Perek Aleph. We're going to be discussing, over here it's going to become first. וטעמים אחדים נאמרו על כך, there's a few reasons that were said on that. הרמב"ם כותב, the Rambam writes, לפי שמלאכה זו נמצאת תדיר. He says the reason why they put it first because it's done all the time. People all the time carrying stuff, constantly. So that's why it was mentioned first. ויקשלו בני אדם על הרוב, and most of the prohibitions of Shabbat, this is what's being done. This is most of the prohibitions in on this particular melacha, carrying from one domain to another domain. So that's the first reason the Rambam gives. You know why it's first even though it should be last? Because that's the one that people fail the most. וטעם שני, and the second reasoning, ללמדנו, to teach us, שהוצאה מרשות לרשות מלאכה היא, that taking it from one domain to another domain, it is a melacha, it is a kind of work. Because you would think, what is a work? A work is when you change an object. You take an object and you change it. You take something and you paint it. That's a work. But over here, you're not changing the object. What are you doing with the object? You're just moving it from one place to another place. Nothing happened. There's no melacha done. So he tells you, no, even this is considered melacha. אף על פי שהנראה ממנה שאינה מלאכה, even though it looks like it's not a job, it's not a מלאכה. This is פירוש המשנה להרמב"ם. ויש מבארים הטעם, and there are those who explains the reason, לפי שממשנה זו למדים כמה ענייני שבת עיקריים. Some say that's not the reason. The reason why this is first, because from this Mishnah, it gives us the basis for all the other laws. Once you learn this Mishnah good, you're going to understand everything else that comes from it. That's why it's first. And we're going to see, it's very interesting, this Mishnah is going to be very, very long because of that, because there's going to be a lot of new concepts that this Mishnah is going to bring, and then all the other Mishnahs are going to be short because we already know the concepts from here. כפי שיבואר להלן, like we explained above. ויש אומרים הטעם, and there are those who says that is the reason, שהואיל והתנא בא ללמדנו בפרק זה, since the Tana comes to teach us in this chapter, דברים שאסור לעשותם בערב שבת, things that one is not allowed to do them even Friday before Shabbat, סמוך לחשיכה, even before darkness, והוא פותח בהלכה, and it starts with the law, לא יצא החייט במחתו סמוך לחשיכה. It says the tailor is not allowed to go out with his needle close to darkness, even though it's not Shabbos yet. We don't allow him to do that. So it says, since these laws begins even before Shabbat, the laws of Shabbat, so therefore it will become first. And so why don't you put the tailor first, right? So because the tailor is a specific case. Over here it's going to take us the general rule, and then it's going to go to you into the tailor. לפיכך הקדים משנה זו ללמד בעניין איסור הוצאה בשבת. This is why it started with this Mishnah, which is the general cases of taking out things on Shabbat. להבנת המשנה, to understand this Mishnah, נקדים ההסבר העניינים הנלמדים ממנה. We're going to start with understanding the things that we're going to learn from this Mishnah. Aleph, the first things. כפי שכבר הזכרנו, like we already mentioned, אסור מן התורה, it is prohibited, a law from the Torah, להוציא חפץ בשבת מרשות היחיד לרשות הרבים. To take an object from a private domain to a public domain. או להכניס חפץ מרשות הרבים לרשות היחיד. Or to bring in an object from the public domain into the private domain. שתי הפעולות הללו, these two actions, taking out an object and bringing in an object, ההוצאה וההכנסה, taking out and bringing in, נקראות במשנתנו יציאות השבת. This is called the exits of Shabbat. In other words, it doesn't matter if you take from the public domain into the private domain, or you take from the private domain into the public domain, we're going to call both actions exit. Because you exited from one domain into another domain. So we used to say exit from my house to the public domain. He says, no, it's also an exit when you go from the public domain to your house. ומבואר בגמרא, and the Gemara it explains, שכל עקירת חפץ ממקומו. It says, what does it mean when you take an object from one domain to another domain? What do you need to do? You need to uproot an object, uproot the object from one domain, העברתו מרשות לרשות בשבת, and put it in the next domain, and transport it to the next domain. קורא לה התנא הוצאה. So the Tana calls this kind of action taking out. ונקט התנא יציאות ולא הוצאות, and grammatically called it יציאות, and he didn't call it taking it out. It says, usually it's more correct to say in Hebrew, lehotzi, not yetzia. Yetzia means an exit. Lehotzi means to take out. It makes more sense to say to take out. So why did he use the word yetzia and not hotza'ah? It's because in the Torah it says, al yetzeh ish mimekomo. It says a person should not go out, a man from his place, b'yom hashvi, in the 7th days. שדורשים אותו לעניין איסור הוצאה. And from over there, they learn that the person is not taking an object from one domain to the next. Al yetzeh imakli. It says, what is it? Where do you learn it from? Because it talks about manna over there, and which means that you're allowed to go out with your vessels to collect manna on Shabbat. Because lilkot et haman, because then you'll be taking an object from a private domain into a public domain. Bet. That's the first thing we're going to learn in our Mishnah. The second thing.
So they're talking there about taking the vessel out, but also bringing the manna out of the public.
Yeah, but the prohibition specifically says you do not go out into the public domain on Shabbat.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And the reason why you do not go out, because you'll be taking a vessel to collect the manna. Obviously, you'll also be bringing it back in. Yeah. That's the first thing you learn. Second thing we're going to learn from this Mishnah. העובר על איסור זה בשוגג חייב קרבן חטאת. If one transgresses this prohibition by mistake, he needs to bring a sin offering. והעובר עליו במזיד חייב מיתה. And if one does it on purpose, he does it on purpose, he's obligated death penalty. Like שאר אבות המלאכות, like any other of the 39 melachos, if one does on purpose, and he had the warning, obviously. Gimel. Another important thing that we're going to learn from this Mishnah is that you have to do the entire job. You cannot do half a job. If you do half a job, you're not allowed to do half a job. We're going to prohibit you from doing half a job, but you're not obligated to bring a sin offering, nor can we punish you even with the warning. What does it mean, half a job? Let's see. אין אדם חייב על הוצאת חפץ מרשות לרשות. A person is not obligated of taking an object from one domain to another, אלא אם כן עקר אותו מרשות היחיד והניחו ברשות הרבים או להפך. He needs to do both the uprooting and the placing. For example, if you do the uprooting and I do the placing, then we're not supposed to do that. But they cannot punish any of us.
פטור.
Yeah. פטור ולאסור. פטור ואסור. פטור מעונש, בדיוק.
הגונב מגנב פטור.
אבל אם עקר מרשות אחת, but if you did the uprooting from one domain, ולא הניח ברשות אחרת, and you did not put it in another domain, או הניח ולא עקר, or you uprooted, or you placed it in one domain, but you didn't do the uprooting, הרי הוא פטור מקורבן חטאת או ממיתה. You are not obligated to bring a sin offering or from death, אבל אסור מדברי סופרים, but the grabba is prohibited even doing half a job. לעשות אפילו עקירה לבד או הנחה לבד. They told you, do not participate, do not uproot, and do not place, even if you're not doing the whole job. וזהו שאמרו, and here comes the rule when it comes to Shabbat. When in Shabbat it says, usually in Shabbat, in most cases, except makom ptur, like we're going to learn later on. But in most cases in Shabbat where it says patur, it means you're not obligated from a sin offering, you're not obligated from a death penalty, but you're not allowed to do it. Patur aval asur. You're not obligated a penalty, but you're not allowed to do it, and you can get lashes from the rabbis. That they're allowed to give you. No, on Shabbat, they can give it to you after Shabbat.
Not if you're patur.
Yeah.
Gan lashes?
Patur, the patur from korban, patur korban ermita. They can do whatever they want. The rabbis will see later on what they did, what they didn't do. But you're not, from the Torah you'll find. You went against the rabbis, they'll deal with you. Whatever they decide your punishment should be, they can give you the punishment. We learn the rules of what the rabbi is later on. Daled. אין אדם חייב על הוצאת חפץ מרשות לרשות. A person is not obligated of taking the object from one domain to another domain, אלא אם כן יעקור אותו ממקום שיש בו לפחות 4 על 4 טפחים. Now we're going to see, we discussed it before already. What is it called? רשות היחיד, רשות הרבים, public domain. In רשות היחיד, the object needs to lie on a place that the place has the measurements, certain amount of measurements. If it has less than amount of this measurement, it is called the Carmelit. It's not the Reshut HaYachid. It's not called the Reshut HaYachid. So we have to understand all this area. So he's only obligated of taking an object from Reshut HaYachid if the object is on a place of 4 by 4 טפחים, ואף יניחהו על גבי מקום שיש בו 4 על 4 טפחים. And he also has to put it on a place that is considered to be a reshut. It has the measurement of a penalty. For example, a pole on the public domain. If you put the object on a regular pole on the public domain, you're not supposed to. But it's not called carrying because it's not. We're going to see. It doesn't have. It is a domain. It's called a Carmelit or a Makom Ptur. Yeah, we're going to see which one it is later on. But it's not Reshut Harabim. It's only 4 by 4. It doesn't have a place. In order to be a place, it needs a public domain or a private domain. It needs to have a certain measurement. And over here it doesn't. Hey, another thing that it needs to be, we're going to learn from it. ידו של אדם חשובה היא כמקום שיש בו 4 על 4 טפחים. Your hand, even though it doesn't have the place of 4 on 4, yeah, it is considered to be a 4 by 4. We're going to consider your hand to be a 4 by 4. For example, right? If I enter with my hand into the public domain, yeah, I put it on a pole, I said I'm not obligated. But if I walked, for example, this is the private domain, this is the public domain, there's a window here, right? If I'm going to put my hand through, I didn't put it anywhere, right? Right? But if I put it on a pole, I'm not obligated yet because I didn't put it on public domain. I put it on the floor on the public domain, I'm obligated. But if I walk to the public domain from the private domain with the object in my hand, as soon as my feet touch the public domain, my hand is considered to be not like the pole. My hand is considered to be like a 4 by 4 area. That's what it's going to be saying now.
So doesn't that go against what we learned before? That you're not doing a half a thing. Because it's in your hand, you're doing a whole thing. I took it for, that's right, I did the whole thing, and therefore I'm obligated. I'm going to be obligated in that case. Very good. לפיכך, מי שנתן דבר בידו של אדם, so it says, even if you didn't עקר את זה, I'm standing on the private domain in my house, and Aryeh puts an object in my hand, and I take this object and I go to the public domain with it, I'm going to say, I didn't pick it up, Aryeh picked it up, and he put it in my hand. It doesn't matter. The moment it comes to my hand, it is, and I'm standing in a private domain, we're going to consider it that I picked it up. I'm moving it from the private domain. הרי זה כאילו הניחו בארץ במקום שאותו אדם נמצא. So as soon as you are having it in your hand, it is like on the land that you're standing on. ברם ידו של אדם אינה לא כרשות היחיד ולא כרשות הרבים, אלא נגררת היא אחר גופו. But if I take my hand out of the private domain and I put it into the public domain and bring it back, it's not a problem. Because the hand is always in the private domain. Because the hand goes after my body, and my body is standing in the private domain,
Therefore, it's not a problem at all. And we're going to discuss.
So you can put your hands out from private to but don't take it out.
That's right. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to do that. If you're allowed to do it or not, we're going to see.
Your extension.
We're going to see that in the Mishnah
domain.
exactly how much you're allowed or not allowed. But yes, you're not doing anything wrong.
Because you are part of the domain in a way.
That's right.
The hand is part of the domain.
That's right.
Kind of like the porch or the bridges that we had sticking out from the house.
Very good. Very good. Exactly like that in the Bikurim. Yeah. Let's finish. We have two more. מי שהתחיל מלאכה בשבת ולא גמר אותה, somebody who started a job on Shabbat and didn't finish it, ונמצא שלא נתחייב עליה, and he is not obligated, הוא בא אחר וגמר את המלאכה הזאת, and somebody else came and finished this kind of job, באופן שאילו גמר אותה הראשון, הייתה המלאכה גמורה והיה חייב עליה, in a manner that if the first one would have finished, they both would have, in other words, each one did half the job. Yeah? שניהם פטורים. They're both not going to be obligated. לפי שהמלאכה נעשתה על ידי שתיים. Because the job was done by two people, ואף אחד מהם לא עשה מעשה גמור. And both did half the job. Yeah. שנאמר, ואם נפש אחת תחטא בשגגה. Because the Torah, it says, if one soul makes a sin by mistake, מעם הארץ, בעשותה אחד ממצוות השם, אשר לא תעשנה, when a person does one of the commandments that shouldn't be done, ודרשו בעשותה, and they learned בעשותה, העושה את כולה, one needs to do the whole job, ולא העושה את מקצתה, and not one, just half a job. יחיד שעשה חייב, and you also learn one that does this job by himself is obligated, שניים שעשו הפטורים, and two that did it, they're not obligated. Also we're going to learn from the Mishnah. It's a lot of things from the Mishnah. משנתנו באה לפרט. Our Mishnah comes to teach us סוגי ההוצאה מרשות לרשות לגבי האדם העומד ברשות היחיד. All kinds of taking out from one domain to another domain for a person that is standing in the private domain. וכן לגבי האדם העומד ברשות הרבים. Also, when he talks about a person, when he's standing in the public domain, we're going to see the rules for that. ולשם הקיצור, היא נוקטת דוגמה של בעל הבית ועני. In this time Mishnah, we're going to take the Mishnah of the owner of the house and a poor person. That's the examples we're going to be using.
Come to his window or something.
That's right. Why does it use this particular example? שכך דרכו של העולם, because this is the way of the world, שאני עומד בחוץ, הוא פושט את ידו לקבל מתנתו של בעל הבית, עומד בפנים, that the poor person is standing outside and extending his hand to get the present of the בעל הבית who stands inside the house. But it can be the opposite. We're not talking, it doesn't care. It's a person who's taking both in it. יציאות השבת, the going out of Shabbat. הוצאות, we're taking out an object, שמרשות לרשות, from one domain to another domain, from a public domain to a private domain, and from a private domain to a public domain, האמורות את השבת, that we're discussing by the laws of Shabbat. כלומר, which means, העברות חפצים מרשות היחיד לרשות הרבים, taking an object from the private domain to the public domain, או להפך, or the opposite, שהן אסורות בשבת. That they are forbidden on Shabbat, כמו שביארנו לעיל, like we already explained in the introduction. So, it's going to give, how are they? So it says, שתיים שהם ארבע בפנים. There are two that are actually four for the person who is inside. There are two types that are actually four types to the person who's standing inside. Let's explain. למי שעומד בפנים, to the person who's standing inside. In our case, it's going to be the owner of the house, the בעל הבית. We'll explain.
Oh.
There's going to be four cases.
Oh.
There's two general cases, but there are actually four cases that we're going to discuss on. היינו ברשות היחיד, which means that the gentleman, the בעל הבית, is standing in the private domain. יש שני מיני יציאות. There are two types of taking out an object. Even to the guy who's standing inside, there are two types. שאיסורן מן התורה, that it is prohibited from the Torah. By the way, it's easy to know over here if it's Torah de Rabbanan. If it's Torah, it's going to tell you chayav.
Oh.
If it's the Rabbanan, it's going to tell you or asur or patur.
Patur.
Yeah. Or asur or patur. She'isuran min Torah. Over here there's two that is prohibited from the Torah. Ve'im asa otam b'mazdid, if he did them on purpose, chayav mita, is obligated death. Ubeshogeg korban chatat. And if he did it by mistake, he's obligated a sin offering. Shehen arba, what does it mean that there are four? Hainu sheyesh od shtei yetziot, she'isuran midivrei sofrim. Later on the rabbis came, and they says, there's two other ones very similar to this, and we're also going to prohibit you from doing it. You're not obligated to bring a sin offering if you did it. You're not obligated a death penalty if you did it, but we are forbidding you to do it. אבל אם עבר עליהם, but if you transgress on them, אינו חייב לא מיתה ומזיד ולא חטאת בשוגג. כפי שהביאו עליו משנתנו. So you don't have any obligation from the Torah, but you're not allowed to do them. ושתיים שהם ארבע בחוץ. So there's two that are four to the inside guy, and there's two that are four to the person who's standing in a public domain. To the ani, to the poor person who's standing in a public domain. וכגון, וכן לעומד בחוץ. And also to the one who's standing outside. היינו, ברשות הרבים, he's standing in a public domain. יש שתי יציאות שאיסורה מן התורה. There are two transference of object that they're prohibited from the Torah. ועוד שתי יציאות שאיסורה מדברי סופרים. And two more that are forbidden from the rabbis. So now he gave us the general rule. And here he's going to start giving us the particular. Each one individually. Ketzad. He says, what are we talking about? Let's start from the beginning. Ha'ani omed bachutz. There's a poor person standing outside. Ubal habayit bifnim. And the owner of the house is standing inside. כבר ביארנו שמשנתנו נקטה דוגמה מן ההווה. We already explained that our Mishnah gave an example from what usually happens. שכן כך מנהגו של עולם. This is the way of the world. שאני עומד בחוץ ובעל הבית עומד בפנים. The poor person is standing outside, the owner of the house is standing inside. ויש מפרשים, but it says, it's still, this is a book of laws. And a book of laws doesn't usually, it tells you the law. I don't care when you say ani.
זה לא book of law, no?
Mishnah. The Mishnah is a book of laws.
Oh.
Yeah, so the book of laws doesn't care if the guy is rich or the guy is poor. Because it really has nothing to do with it. It has to do with a person standing or not standing. So if it tells you rich or poor, immediate question is going to be on the Mishnah, why are you specifying rich or poor? Is it only the rich? If he's got less than $100, then the laws doesn't apply?
The rich stand out, you let him...
You let him do that, exactly. So what are you all talking about? Rich, poor, it's got nothing to do with rich or poor. Good morning.
Good morning, אדון בנימין.
Yeah, so it has nothing to do with the rich or poor. שמשנתנו בא להשמיע דרך אגב, our Mishnah comes to teach us by the way. What does it come to teach you? The Mishnah comes to teach you that you should know, even though when you would be thinking, ויש מפרשים, there are those who explain, שבמשנתנו בא להשמיע דרך אגב, our Mishnah comes to teach us the reason why it uses בעל הבית and אני, to tell you, even if it's a mitzvah, you would think that for a mitzvah, maybe you're allowed to break Shabbos a little bit, the Rabbanan.
Okay.
At least maybe you're allowed to break because the poor person needs to eat something. בא להשמיע דרך אגב, שאף על פי שיש צד מצווה בדבר. Now, when it comes to the Torah, for sure it's not going to let you do it. But maybe when it comes to the rabbis, the rabbis instituted in the mitzvah itself, like we learned in Purim, that maybe you're allowed to a little bit, like they gave permission. צד מצווה בדבר. מצווה הבאה בעבירה, אסורה. So this tells you a mitzvah that comes to a thing, it's still prohibited, וחייבים עליה, and you're obligated on it. And that's why it says ani and ashir, not because to tell you he's rich or poor, but to tell you another different rule, even for a mitzvah, you're not allowed to break any even little detail in these rules that we're going to be discussed. So let's continue. So this is the case. We're going to say that this table is...
your house.
Let's do the opposite, because I'm the ani first.
Okay.
Yeah, this table is a house. This table is a house. So the case is like this. I'm going to be the poor person. I'm going to represent the poor person right now. So,
פשט העני את ידו לפנים, I'm a poor person, I'm taking my hand inside, without an object. This is the house, there's a window here, let's say. Yeah, I'm putting my hand inside the window, ובידו סל, and I have a basket in my hand. So I'm holding a basket, I'm putting in the basket inside. לקבל בו מתנה מבעל הבית. I want to receive a present from the owner of the house. ונתן לתוך ידו של הבעל הבית. The בעל הבית is standing over there, and I place the basket in his hand. I'm taking it
from you?
No, I'm placing it, he's going like this, he's doing nothing.
Okay.
And I'm putting it in his hand.
In his hand.
That's right. ונתן לתוך ידו של בעל הבית. את סלו, and I give my basket into the hand of the owner of the house. So what did I do? We're not going to go into the Gemara. The Gemara makes it much more complicated. We're just going to remain with the laws of the Mishnah. The prohibition is I'm not allowed to do two things. I'm not allowed to do akira, uplifting, and placing. If I place from one domain and I put in another domain, then I'm obligated from the Torah. Over here, I was in the public domain. I had an object in the public domain. I uprooted it. And then I went inside and I put it either on your hand or on a table. It doesn't matter, same thing. Your hand and your table, we discussed, is the same rules. So I put it in on your hand, on your table. So I took an object from the public domain. I put it in the private domain. I'm obligated from the Torah. נמצא שעקר העני את סל מרשות הרבים וניחו ברשות היחיד. I took it from the public domain, I put it in the private domain. וכבר ביארנו, we already explained, שידו של אדם חשובה כמקום של 4 על 4 טפחים. The hand is like putting on a table. The hand of a person we're going to have, it has the measurements of רשות היחיד. It has a wide measurement, even though it doesn't really. הואיל, why? Because היא עשויה להניח וליטול מן החפצים ואפילו גדולים מאוד. Because you can even hold in your hand a רשות היחיד. It's possible for a person to hold inside a table. And the table is רשות היחיד. So that's why they say the hand itself is going to be considered רשות היחיד. Or, so that's one way. He's obligated from the Torah. Took an object from public domain. There's another way he can do it. Or, that the balabait is standing inside the house like this, and there's a basket in the balabait's hand. Right? או שנטל מתוכה. שנטל העני מתנה מתוך ידו של הבעל הבית. The balabait didn't give it to him. The balabait was just standing. And he took it, he went with his hand inside the house, he grabbed the basket from the private domain, he's grabbing it from the private domain, the hand is considered to be private domain, and now he's taking it out and placing it on in the public domain. He doesn't even need to place it. He's already there, that's right. לרשות הרבים, ונמצא שעקר את המתנה מרשות היחיד, והניחה ברשות הרבים. So we find that he took it from the private domain and he placed it in the public domain.
יכול להיות פוילושטיק פה, רבי.
We'll see, we're going to talk about these are the two. The two that are four, these are the four, we'll discuss. Yeah? העני חייב. The poor person is obligated from the Torah in those two cases. לפי שעקר חפץ מרשות אחת והניחו ברשות אחרת, because he took an object from one domain and he put it in a different domain. ונמצא שעשה מלאכה שלמה. And what's the problem? The problem, he did the whole job. The work is complete. How? When you have akira and anacha. When you uproot and you place, that's one complete job. והרי שתי יציאות. So here we found two יציאות, two taking outs, שחייב עליהם העומד בחוץ, היינו ברשות הרבים. That this is, who's obligated in these two cases? The ani. Either he's placing something inside, or he's taking something from inside to the outside, he's obligated. הכנסת החפץ מרשות הרבים לרשות היחיד, taking in objects from public domain to the private domain, and or הוצאת החפץ מרשות היחיד לרשות הרבים, or taking an object from the private domain to the public domain. And in that case, ובעל הבית פטור. And the בעל הבית didn't do nothing, he's פטור.
Now, let's discuss. Usually when it says in Shabbat, patur means aval asur.
פטור מעונש.
Yeah. Over here, patur means really patur. He didn't even do any jobs. You can't even complain him. Of course, we're not going to give you.
בא לעני, הוא אומר לו כך.
Wait, we're talking about מלאכות שבת. הוא יכול להיות חייב לשים מכשול בפני עיוור. לשים מכשול בפני עיוור is חייב and all the other. But for מלאכות שבת, he's patur. But again, the important part to remember over here, usually on Shabbat, when it says patur, it means, but the Rebbe is not allowing him to do that. Over here, it's going to see patur, completely patur, from מלאכות שבת. patur, שלא עשה כלום. He didn't do nothing. ואף לכתחילה אין כל איסור של שבת לגבי בעל הבית. And even from the beginning, the בעל הבית didn't do any prohibition of Shabbat. Other prohibition he might have, but we're not discussing Shabbat over here. Okay. So we find two, that the two for the person who's standing outside. The two that is obligated from the Torah. Now we're going to see, what about the... we're going to see if he's talking about the Baal Habayit or both of them. We'll see soon. Pashat Baal Habayit, the Baal Habayit extends his hand, et yado lachutz, his hand to the outside. Yeah, the Baal Habayit now takes his hand to the outside. Ubeyado matana le'ani, and in his hand he's got a present to the poor person. Venatan, yeah, it's the other way around. It doesn't discuss the Rabbanan yet. Venatan letoch yado shel ani, and he put it into the hand of the poor person, et hamatana, the present, ונמצא שעקר בעל הבית את החפץ מרשות היחיד וניחו ברשות הרבים. And we find that he took the object from the private domain and put it into the public domain, exactly the opposite of what the poor person did. Yeah? In other words, the Baal Habayit did both things. He did the akira, he uprooted from the private domain and he put it in the public domain. או שנטל מתוכה, or the opposite, that the ani was standing like this with the basket, and the Baal Habayit reached outside and grabbed it from his hand and put it inside. Yeah? או שנתן בעל הבית צלו של העני מתוך ידו, that he took the basket of the poor person from inside his hand, והכניס אותו לפנים, and he put it inside, ונמצא שעקר בעל הבית החפץ מרשות הרבים, וניחו ברשות היחיד. Over here, the owner of the house took it from the public domain, and put it in the private domain. In that case, בעל הבית חייב, the owner of the house is obligated, שעשה כל מלאכת ההוצאה או הכנסה, because he did the entire job. He did uprooting and he did placement. עקירה ברשות אחת והנחה ברשות אחרת. והרי שתי יציאות שחייב עליהם עומד בפנים. And over here we have the two taking out of an object for the person who's standing inside. היינו ברשות היחיד, which means in the private domain. הוצאת החפץ מרשות היחיד לרשות הרבים. We have an example of his taking an object from the private domain to the public domain. אין הכנסת החפץ מרשות הרבים לרשות היחיד. And taking an object from the public domain to the private domain. And just like the Baal Habayit was patur completely, he was completely not obligated from before, והעני patur, and the poor person is completely fine, he's not obligated, לגמרי, completely, he didn't do any work of Shabbos. כלומר, שלא עשה כל איסור של שבת, he didn't do any prohibition of Shabbat, כמו שביארנו לעיל בעניין בעל הבית, like we explained above, in the matter of the Baal Habayit, exactly. So now we have the two for the outside and the two for the inside. Now we're going to discuss what happens when it's the Freudenstück, like you said. So let's see. So the poor person is standing outside, right? פשט העני את ידו לפנים. The poor person takes his basket, he puts his basket to the inside, ובידו הסל, in his hand is the basket, and like this he's doing it. Yeah? Okay. And who takes it from his hand? ונטל בעל הבית את הסל, and the owner of the house takes the basket. מתוכה, from the hand of the poor person. You know, he doesn't place it in the hand of the Baal Habayit, the Baal Habayit takes the basket. Yeah. מתוכה, from inside. מתוך ידו של העני. So, ונמצא שלא עשה העני, אלא את עקירת החפץ מרשות הרבים. So over here, the only thing that the poor person, he didn't do the entire melacha. All he did was he uprooted the object from the public domain. He never placed it in the private domain.
That means that the בעל הבית
Is doing the placing.
So he is חייב והוא חייב.
Wait, slowly. ואילו הנחת החפץ ברשות היחיד, and the placing of the object in the private domain, נעשתה על ידי בעל הבית, was done by the owner of the house. או שנתן לתוכה. Or another way it can happen. What's the other way? He put inside of it. היינו, in that case, שפשט העני את ידו הריקה לפנים, the poor person extended his hand completely empty to the inside, ונתן בעל הבית מתנה לתוך ידו של עני. And the בעל הבית put it into his hand. והוציא, and the עני took it outside, העני את המתנה שקיבל, he took it outside the present that he received. היינו, over here also, it's only half. בעל הבית עקר את החפץ מרשות היחיד. The owner of the house uprooted the object from the private domain, but who placed it in the public domain? והעני הניחו ברשות הרבים. And the poor person placed it in the public domain. So in that case,
50-50.
שניהם פטורים, both of them are patur. But over here, patur means asur. Yeah, asur. The Rabbanan says that's what you know. These are the four that we discussed. שניהם פטורים. Why are שניהם פטורים? שלא העני ולא בעל הבית עשו מלאכה שלמה. But neither of them did עקירה אין הנחה. They never did the whole job. אלא מקצת מלאכה. Each of them did half the job. כמו שביארנו, like we explained. ברם, but unlike before when we said פטור, over here it's אסור. ברם אסורים הם לעשות כן. Over here from the rabbis they say you're not allowed to do that. שגזרו חכמים, because the sages made a decree, שמא יבוא כל אחד בפני עצמו לעשות מלאכה שלמה. Once you give it, you're going to forget, I take, I put, I this. No. Don't do it because it's going to be troubles. והרי שתי יציאות, so now we have two of taking the objects out, שאיסורן מדברי סופרים לגבי העומד בחוץ. That it's prohibited from the words of the rabbis to the one who's standing outside. מקצת הכנסה על ידי עקירת החפץ מרשות הרבים, half of bringing in an object through taking the object from the public domain, ומקצת הוצאה על ידי הנחת החפץ ברשות הרבים, and a little bit of taking out by the object that stands in the public domain. Okay, now we're doing the opposite, exactly the same thing, but for the בעל הבית, for the owner of the house. פשט בעל הבית את ידו לחוץ, בעל הבית extended his hand to the outside, ובתוכה מתנה לעני, and inside the present to the poor person, and the poor person takes from it, ונטל לעני מתוכה. And the poor person takes the present from it, ונמצא שבעל הבית עשה את עקירת החפץ מרשות היחיד. So we find the בעל הבית takes the object from the private domain, והעני עשה את הנחת החפץ ברשות הרבים. And the poor person did the placement of the object in the public domain. או שנתן לתוכה, or that he put inside of it. What does it mean? That the בעל הבית extended his hand to the outside. The בעל הבית takes his hand, שנתן העני סלו לתוך ידו של בעל הבית הפשוטה לחוץ. And then the עני puts his hand in the hand of the בעל הבית, like this, and the בעל הבית takes it back inside. והכניס בעל הבית סל לפנים, and the בעל הבית takes it inside, כלומר שהעני עקר את החפץ, in exactly the same way, the poor person did the uprooting, מרשות הרבים, from the public domain, ובעל הבית הניחו ברשות היחיד. And the בעל הבית placed it in the private domain. שניהם פטורים. They're both פטור. לפי שכל אחד מהם לא עשה מלאכה שלמה, because each and every one of them did not do the complete job, אלא מקצת מלאכה. They did only half a job. והרי שתי יציאות שמדבשרים לא בפנים. So this is two taking out from the rabbis to the person who's standing inside. מקצת הוצאה על ידי עקירת החפץ מרשות היחיד, half of taking out through uprooting the object from the private domain, ומקצת הכנסה על ידי הנחת החפץ מרשות היחיד, and half the taking out by placing the object in the private domain. אוקיי. בארנו שתי הדוגמאות שבספר, we explained the two examples that in the end of the Mishnah, שהראשונה היא לשתי יציאות שמדברי סופרים, that the first one is the two taking out from the words of the rabbis, לעומד בחוץ, to the person who's standing outside, והשנייה היא לשתיים שמדברי סופרים לא עומד בפנים. And the second one is that the two of the rabbis to the one who's standing inside, to the בעל הבית. ואף על פי שבכל אחת מהדוגמאות הללו, and even though that even in each one of these examples, יש גם שתיים לצד שכנגד, there are two more to the ani and the בעל הבית, it's exactly the same. היינו שבדוגמה הראשונה, in the first example, יש גם שתיים לעומד בפנים, there are two. It says, what's the difference? You didn't need to tell me the two for the one who's standing outside, and then the two to the one who's standing inside. Because it's the same two, it's exactly the opposite. כשפשט הענית ידו לפנים נטל בה לתוכה. הרי הקירה לא עומד בחוץ, you have uprooting to the one who's standing outside, והנחה לא עומד בפנים, and placing to the one who's standing בפנים. וכשנתן לתוכה והוציא, and when he placed it inside the fair, he took it out. הרי הקירה לא עומד בפנים, then you have uprooting to the one who's standing inside, והנחה לא עומד בחוץ, and the placement to the one who's standing outside. וכן בדוגמה השנייה יש גם שתיים עומד בחוץ. And also in the second example, it's exactly the same thing. What's the difference? Why do you have to tell it twice? מכל מקום אין משנתנו מונה אלא את יציאות של אותו אדם שפשט את ידו תחילה ועשה את עקירת החפץ מלאכתו. The Mishnah says it's important, it looks like who starts the job, according to the Mishnah. Because if you start the job, it looks like it's worse than if you end the job. That's why it says it that way. Because it says if you start the job, there's a different, we're going to look at it maybe a little bit different than if you end the job. That's what it's going to say. ברם, so בתוספות שבת, דיבור המתחיל פטורי דעתי לידי חיוב חטאת. It says, this is, in the Tosfos ask this question, and he says this is patur, if to bring a sin offering or not. ברם, רש"י מפרש בדרך אחרת. רש"י explains it in another manner. שבכל דוגמה משתי הדוגמאות שבספר, that in every example, from the two examples that are in the end, יש יציאה אחת מדברי סופרים לעני העומד בחוץ. There is one taking out from the words from the rabbis to the poor person standing outside, ויציאה אחת לבעל הבית העומד בפנים, and one taking out לבעל הבית who stands inside, שאין המשנה מונה אלא הקירות שהם תחילת המלאכה. In other words, you thought that the Mishnah is talking about both about the Baal Habayit or both the Ani. It says no. Over there it's discussing first it's the Ani that extended his hand and take it outside. And the second one is the Baal Habayit who you put it in his hand and takes it inside. It says, you thought they're both talking about the Ani. No, it says, the Rashi says one is talking about the Ani and one is talking the Baal Habayit. And the other way, it's also one is talking about the Ani, one is talking the Baal Habayit. The way we learned it is we thought they both is about the Ani. Yeah. Rashi says one and one, and it's important to know who started first, so therefore you need to say all four. ויש לחשוש בהם שמא יגמור את המלאכה. Says, why is starting more important? Because starting, if you started something, if you end it, you're obligated from the Torah. But if you end something, for sure you're not obligated from the Torah.
Why? If you end something?
Yeah.
Finish something?
If you started a job, you might come to finish it. But if you are the one who's doing only the end part, there is no way you're going to become obligated from the Torah. Maybe from the rabbis, but you can't become obligated from the Torah. Do you understand what I'm saying?
He started and you finished, but you are obligated to be finished.
Wait. Let's explain this good. If I'm the Ani, and I take an object from the private domain, and I put it into the public domain, now I might finish the job. If I am going to finish the job, I'm going to be obligated to the Torah. So either I finish the job and I'm obligated to the Torah, or he's going to finish the job, and then I'm not obligated from the Torah. Right? But for the guy who's taking it from my hand, he cannot finish the job. He for sure cannot finish the job. He can do only half a job. So for him, there's no way ever he can be obligated from the Torah. So that's why doing the first part is so important. That's why they say, you have to say it 4 times. Because the first guy might come from a prohibition from the Torah. The second guy, he's never going to come to prohibition from the Torah. So you can think it's more lenient. So you have to say it both ways. That's the idea. אבל הנחות שהן סוף מלאכה,
But the placement that they are only the end of the melacha, which means you can only be obligated from the rabbis, en mishnatenu mona klal. The Mishnah, according to Rashi, doesn't even discuss those kind of הנחות. כך מפרש גם הרב מברטנורה, this is also the explanation of Rabbi Ram Bigelman, והמאירי כותב, the מאירי writes, שפירוש זה עיקר, this is the main thing. In other words, the reason why the Mishnah says it this way, because the Mishnah only is worried about chashash, a chance that it's going to be an obligation from the Torah. And if the Balabai takes the object, there's never, as long as the object is in his domain, not in the outside domain. Yeah. אין משנתנו מונה כלל, שפירוש זה עיקר. And the Meiri says this is the main explanation. ומה שהמשנה מונה יציאות של עני ויציאות של בעל הבית, and the fact that the Mishnah calls it the taking out of the poor person and taking out of the owner of the house, אף על פי שעניין אחד הוא, even though it is one matter, לפי שהוצאת חפץ מרשות לרשות, because taking out an object from one domain to another domain אינה נראית כמלאכה. It doesn't look like a job at all, ויש בה מעין חידוש, and it's different than all other מלאכות of Shabbat. הילקח צריכה המשנה לפרט איסורי הוצאה בכל אחד מהם. Therefore the Mishnah needs to tell you, since it's a strange one, people are going to tell you, yeah, but maybe if you're only worried about the Rabbanan, you're allowed to do it. Yeah. So, but that's why he has to say it both ways, even though that's right. Because, and why would you think, you have, usually in the regular Mishnah you wouldn't need to say, you would assume it. It says, because Otza'ot Shabbat is so strange, the rules about it are so strange, it's not a melacha. People says, if it's so strange, maybe this is strange in it, that it's different. So that's why they have to say it so many times to tell you whichever way you're going to do it. Even only if you have an Isur de Rabbanan, you're also obligated. Ben בעומד בחוץ, ben בעומד בפנים. Whether you're standing outside, whether you're standing inside. Up to here.